Alright, in the previous video we talked about linear equalities or linear equations, and in this video we're going to be talking about how to solve linear inequalities. So a linear inequality is essentially an expression that is written in this form. So instead of having an equal sign in the middle, we have something that is called an inequality sign. So it basically tells us a relation between two quantities. So for example, here it is telling us that x plus 6 is less than 3. So there are essentially four types of symbols that you can have. You can have less or equal, less than, less or equal than, then you have greater than or greater or equal to. So there are four different symbols that we can use. And basically, to solve linear inequalities, we can use the same operations that we would normally use for equations. So for example, here to solve for x, what we can do is we can subtract a 6 from both sides of the inequality. So that way we get rid of that 6, and then we're left with x is less than minus 3. So basically what this is telling you is that x can be any value so long as it is smaller than minus 3. So x could be minus 4, minus 5. It could actually be any rational number or irrational number that is less than minus 3. So it's basically less restricted than an equation, because an equation requires you that to the requires the value to be exactly equal to a specific amount or a specific value. Whereas here we have a very broad range of solutions and various different answers for that single inequality. We can also multiply or divide both sides by a single constant. So in this case, we can multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of that 2 in the denominator. And that's going to give us x is greater than 2. Now, there's only one difference when it comes to operations. And this is something that you need to be very careful with. And it is that if you multiply both sides by minus 1, then you must invert the inequality sign. So basically, in this case, we have this inequality here. Now, if we subtract 3 from both sides, we're left with minus 2x is less or equal to 1. And then we can divide both sides by 2. But now we have the situation where we have a minus attached to the x. And in general, when you're going to express the solution to some equation or inequality, you don't want to have anything on the same side as the pronumeral or the variable that you're solving for. So if you want to multiply both sides by minus 1 to get rid of it on this side, that's actually going to also invert the sign here. And the reason for that is that you have to think about, if you're looking at it this way, then x is going to have certain values. But if you invert the sign, then basically it's going to tell you that x is going to be greater or equal to minus half. So I guess that's the only thing that we need to be very careful with when we're dealing with inequalities. Okay, so now let's do some examples. Okay, so in this case, we're given this inequality. Now, we need to bring all the x's to one side. So I guess we could move the 2x to this side since this number is greater. So let's write 9 less or equal to 4x minus 1. We can now bring the 1 to this side. So we're going to have plus 1 on both sides. That's going to be 10 less or equal than 4x. And now we can divide both sides by 4. But here notice that we have the x on the right hand side. We usually want it on the left hand side. So if we wanted to write this equation in the other way, we need to also, if we're looking at it this way, this symbol is pointing in that direction. So if we wanted to look at it from the other direction, the symbol would actually be pointing like this, because it is telling us that x is greater or equal to, so in this case we have to write x is greater or equal to 10 divided by 4, which is the same as saying x is greater or equal to 2.5. So that's basically the answer for that question. Alright, so now let me just write here. Now let's do this one. We have this expression here, so the best thing to do is first is to either we can expand the left hand side, or we can divide both sides by 4 to get rid of it already, because this number is divisible by 4, so we could write x plus 2 is less than 3. And now we can move the 2 to that side, so this becomes x is going to be less than 1. And that's it. That's your answer. Now let's do this one. We got to solve for a. So once again, we could actually divide both sides by -3 actually. So if we divide both sides by -3, this is going to become -3 here. So we're going to have a plus 5. But hang on a minute, we are dividing by a negative sign on both sides. So what that tells us is that the sign needs to be inverted. Okay, so be very careful when you're doing that kind of thing. If you're handling negatives, so if you're multiplying both sides by a negative or dividing by a negative, you always need to invert the sign of the inequality. So here you have -3. And then that means that a is going to be less than -8. Okay, so that's going to be the solution to that inequality. And one way we could actually check that this is the correct answer is, okay, so what's one number that is less than -8? Well, one number less than -8 would be a is equal to -9. So if we now plug this into this inequality, we're going to have -9. So let me just do it here. So we have -3, -9 plus 5, greater than 9. So now what happens is here we're going to have -4, -3, greater than 9. And then what we can do is this is going to be 12 greater than 9. So we have checked that that's indeed the case. Then we could try something equal or greater than 8. And we should see that the inequality is not satisfied. So that's how you would check that your answer is correct. Now let's go with this one. We have a minus here, minus there. We could multiply both sides by minus and then just invert the sign. So we have 11 less than 7 minus 7x. Alright, so now with this what we can do is, well, we could simply move the x to this side. I mean, that would be perfectly reasonable. So 7x, we're gonna move the 11 to this side, so 7 minus 11, that's -4, and then x would be less than -4 on 7. So fairly straightforward. Now in this case, let's see what we can do. We can have, so we're gonna have the following. Alright, so let's move the 5b to this side, so this becomes 7 greater than -4. So we have this becomes positive, so 5b minus 3b, that's plus 2b. We can move this to the other side, so that becomes 11 greater than 2b. And now if we look at the inequality from this side, we can rearrange that to become b is going to be less than 11 divided by 2. So that's going to be our inequality. Now for this one, well, we could just expand both sides, so I guess that's what we are going to do first here. So that's greater or equal to 4m minus 16. Now we can move to this side, so it becomes 7m. This to that side, so add 16 on both sides. This becomes 17. So 17 is greater or equal to 7m. And then from that, what we can conclude is that m is going to be less or equal to 17 divided by 7. And that's pretty much it. Now, in this particular one, well, it's pretty much the same, so we gotta get rid of that 3 first. So how about we multiply both sides by 3? So x plus 1 is gonna be greater or equal to -2 times 3, that's gonna be -6. Then we're gonna subtract 1 from both sides, then x is gonna be greater or equal to -7. Now here what we can do is we could multiply both sides by 3. So we could write it this way: 3 times 5x plus 1 all divided by 6 is going to be less than -3x plus 2. And now what we can do with this is we could actually simplify this fraction, so this becomes 5x plus 1 divided by 2 equals to -3x plus 2 here. And then we can multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of this one. So we have 5x plus 1 is less than -6x plus 4. And now we can add 6x to both sides, so that becomes 11x here. We can subtract 1 from both sides. This becomes 0. This becomes 3. And so our final answer is going to be x is going to be less than 3 divided by 11. So hopefully this is giving you a better idea of how to solve linear inequalities. The process is pretty much the same as solving equations, but the only difference is that whenever you're multiplying by negative or dividing by a negative number, you need to make sure that you invert the sign of the inequality. And if you're looking at an equation from the other direction, so essentially instead of having x on the right hand side, you have it on the left hand side, you need to also invert the sign. So make sure that you are clear on those minor things that you need to be very careful with. And solving linear inequalities is a pretty straightforward business from that.